Alright, so in this video we're going to be taking a look at comments and programming style. So up to this point you've seen comments used to make notes about specific lines of code. So you've got these two different examples, one where we have a single line comment that just spans an entire single line in your, essentially what we could say is like the body of text for your program. We've also seen these cases where we've written a line of actual code and then we put the comment right after that on that same line. So these are going to be two cases where we're using single line comments, but these are not the only kinds of comments that we can use in our programs. So we can also provide more detailed descriptions using either of these other two. So the first one is going to be a multi-line comment. You can tell when it's a multi-line comment because you're going to have that /* at the very beginning of it, and then you've got a */ at the very end of it. And with a multi-line comment, the antithesis to the single line comment, it's going to be something that can span multiple lines. So it's very useful when you need to write out a much larger body, a much larger description to maybe explain the entirety of what your program is meant to do, or maybe eventually we'll get into things like methods or classes. Maybe you need to describe the functionality of a particular piece of code that is very complex. So those are very useful situations to be using the multi-line comment. The other one is going to be the documentation comment. So this one looks very similar to the multi-line comment. The key difference is going to be the starting character. It's going to use /** instead. So that's going to be how we start a documentation comment. These are going to span multiple lines as well, but they also provide some additional features such as annotations that are available for what are known as documentation comment, or for your Java docs. In a moment, when we look in NetBeans, I'll show you how to actually access those Java docs so you can see what effect documentation comments have. Also, this idea of annotations, we will discuss this a little bit later. There are going to be certain annotations that can actually modify the appearance of our documentation comments. We'll also, since there is one in particular that shows up whenever we create a Java program, I will briefly mention that one as well. So let's go over to NetBeans. We'll go ahead and create a project for this. So we'll go ahead and create a new Java application. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and call this comments and style, since I'm going to be talking about both these three different types of comments and also talking a little bit about programming style. I'm just going to go ahead and do that all in this one project. Go ahead and finish. And so right off the bat, when we first create our project, the default code in our Java file actually has a couple of these different types of comments already. So we can see a multi-line comment right here. You can tell by the /* at the beginning, // at the end, and you can see that it spans multiple lines. So you've got all of this right here. This multi-line comment that they provide here is primarily a combination of a kind of a license header and just a quick descriptor about the initial setup of your code. For the most part, we typically don't need to worry about this, so that's kind of why I continuously remove it. The next thing we've got right here, this is one of our documentation comments. So this is going to be the first comment inside of here that's actually pretty useful. So it provides one annotation. So whenever we see annotations, they're going to be marked by this this @ symbol. In this case, they're doing the @author annotation, and then followed by that is going to be the username that you're under. So this will typically be the username for your account on your operating system, so on your actual computer. So in my case, this is just going to be kind of a shorthand for my last name. That's what I'm using for my username on my this laptop that I'm doing this from. So in addition to this, if I wanted to, I could actually provide a short description right here. Typically, the reason that this documentation comment is prepared for you is because there is this expectation that you probably want to put a general description about your program right here. It's a pretty good place to put it. So I'll go ahead and add something like that for this particular project. So we're going to say this program is used to demonstrate, let's say, the usage of comments and the purpose of certain certain practices for programming style. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say something like that, and then we'll move over to the actual class itself. So we've got our public class, comments and style. We've got our curly braces indicating the body for it. Inside of here, we've got another documentation comment. So again, we can tell that these are documentation comments because they start with /**. And then inside of there, we've got another annotation. So the annotation they're using here is this @param annotation. So I'm not going to go into much detail about this just yet, since this is going to be related to methods. So I'm going to bring this back up again a little bit later. What I am going to do, though, is open up the JavaDoc window so we can actually see what this comment looks like. But before we do that one, I want to go ahead and do it with this one first, just to see a kind of generic documentation comment, and then we'll see what effect that this @param tag has on this this other documentation comment. So in NetBeans, in order to access that JavaDoc window, you're going to go to this window tab right here, and you're going to go ahead and open that up. Inside of here, you're going to find these IDE tools, and then inside of those IDE tools, you're going to see this JavaDoc documentation right here. So you'll go ahead and open that up, and then that's going to display a little window near the bottom right there, pretty much in that same location where you typically see the console window. So inside of here, we can see a couple of different things. So it's showing us at the very top the package that this is inside of. So that's based on this statement right here. It's also showing us a little bit about the class itself. So it's giving us our public class comments and style. It also includes this part where it says extends object. You don't need to worry too much about that right now. The main thing here is going to be that it's got this note for us. So it's printing out everything that I typed right here. So it's saying this program is used to demonstrate the usage of comments and the purpose of certain practices for programming style. The one thing that it leaves out is going to be this @author tag. So for whatever reason, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why they chose to design it this way, but the @author annotation is not displayed in a JavaDoc. But if we take a look over here at this one, so when we take a look at this documentation comment we have for our main method, it's going to go ahead and show us the method that this documentation comment is being used for. And because we have this @param tag, it will actually show us that right here. So it's going to extend this name out. So param is short for parameters. And then it's going to display both the name that we gave it. So in this case, it's going to be that args. If you're curious, that's referring to this right here. And then it's going to tell you what that's for. So in this case, it's going to tell you that it's the command line arguments. Again, just like with that extra little bit that we saw for our class, this will also be something that you don't really need to worry about just yet. Eventually, I will come back to talk a little bit about this args and what purpose that serves in the main method. So this kind of covers the documentation comments. We saw a little bit about the multi-line. We've also still got this single line comment right here for our what I described as the to-do stub, where it provides this little bit right here to let you know where to start adding code for your program. Obviously, if we kept that multi-line comment in that I removed earlier, you could see in there that it tells you a little bit about trying to reformat what's displayed when we first create it. For the most part, I don't really worry too much about that. Cleaning this up is pretty quick and easy. So this will cover everything for comments. So the other thing I want to talk about is going to be for programming style. So programming style is going to be the visual arrangement of the source code. So this has nothing to do with how the source code actually runs. So it's not going to have anything to do with the functionality, not even necessarily anything to do with the efficiency. It's just going to be about things like the spaces, the indentations, blank lines, or maybe the placement of certain punctuation characters. So the reasoning behind good programming style is that you're trying to provide a consistent layout that is easy for you and other programmers to read. So as far as the program is concerned, it's not going to be more efficient, but as far as your own time spent working on that program, generally, if you make the program as easy as possible to read, that probably makes things more efficient for you when you're working on that project or that program. So this process is known as making the source code more readable. So up to this point, you've likely seen some of my own personal preferences for programming style. You've probably noticed a couple of things that I frequently do for all of the other programs that we've written so far. So that includes things like placing curly braces on their own separate lines. Not everybody necessarily does that. Some people leave them at the very end of the line that they correspond to. Making sure that you use tabs for the bodies of your classes and methods. So as far as tabs are concerned, the only real decision to be made there, or the choice there, is just whether or not people want to use tabs. Some people use 4 spaces, so a little bit of a distinction there. It doesn't necessarily matter which way you approach it. Having some clear distinction between the inside and outside of a class, or the inside and the outside of a method, everybody does that. That's pretty much something that you always need to be doing. Also, including blank lines between variable declarations and initializations, and then the rest of the program. So there's some cases where people will do this, other cases where they won't. My best advice to you is to just try to be as consistent as possible with that. So as you become more familiar with writing code on your own, you will likely eventually start to develop your own personal style. At first, you probably won't notice all that often that you, whether or not you're actually adhering to any kind of consistent style. You'll probably just kind of write code wherever it will fit. But that's totally fine. Eventually, you'll start to realize that it's difficult to read or to parse through the code if you don't format it a certain way, and you'll slowly get better at it as you go. So my best advice I can give to you is to try to be as consistent as you can to make your code significantly easier to read. So to briefly kind of go through a couple of those things that we just discussed. So if we take a look at this program right here, you can see that we've got our class header right here, and then we've got all the stuff outside of the class. And you'll notice that for everything outside of the class, that it is right up against that leftmost edge of our text editor. But once we get into the body of it, so for me, I would typically move this curly brace right here, and then we'd remove this space. But once we get into the body of it, so everything between these 2 curly braces, you'll notice that everything is tabbed over once. So everything right here is being tabbed over. And then, of course, if we take a look at the main method, we see the same thing right there. So if we say, this is outside of the main method, so relative to that, it's like right against that line right here. But once we get into the body of the main method, we tab over once more so that we can very clearly distinguish between when we are inside the main method and when we are outside the main method. So this alignment that we use is very convenient for being able to keep track of precisely where we are. And your text editor, depending on precisely which IDE you're using, will typically have a few visual cues to really help make this as clear as possible. So that includes things like this small dashed line that we have right here, indicating the start and end of the this particular body right here. You can see it right here for this comment. You can see it right here for this comment, and you can also see it right here for this main method. You'll also notice these little bars that they include. These are mostly just to be able to minimize, to kind of open and close certain parts of it. That's usually going to be tied to the characters so that it can tell where it begins and ends. So the primary thing you're looking for, as long as your tabs are consistent, is going to be this dashed line that you see right here. So this will cover everything for programming style. So go ahead and wrap up here. Getting into the next video, we're going to start looking at ways to make our programs more interactive. The first thing we're going to take a look at now is going to be being able to read input from the user whenever they type something on their keyboard.